Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in Rudolf Otto and the idea of the holy. We're going to take a look at a composite summary of his position up through page 75. And we know that this is going to be a composite phenomenology because Professor Otto writes phenomenology. He looks at Christianity from the point of view of experience, not dogmatism, not rational precepts. He examines Christianity from the point of view of experience. So he writes phenomenology. So our summary chart is going to be our usual phenomenology summary chart. And I want to make one preliminary comment here before we get started. If you take a look at the chart, go to the very top and look at blocks 5, 6, and 7. That's the internal triad that informs Professor Otto's phenomenology. And when you look at this, basically, I've labeled the three blocks. Look at the bottom of each block. I've labeled them Schema, Infusion, and Rhema. And Professor Otto tells us that Christianity has been reduced to inauthentic schemas that emphasize moral precepts and rationalization, but there can be authentic schemas that can be formed, and they're authentic when they are infused schemas, infused by the numinous. So his internal triad is basically schema, passing through the moment of infusion with the numinous to become Rhema, living voice. Living voice. We get involved in Praxis with making the gospel living voice. And that emphasizes the art side of proclamation. The art side, not the rational side. The artistic side. So even Praxis gets qualified by Professor Otto. So keep that in mind as we go through this summary. But by page 75 it gives us a complete phenomenology. So we will still have another 100 pages to go in the study. However, we will have this composite now as our foundational groundwork as we do take a look at the remaining 100 pages of the manuscript. And just as a reminder, the bottom of the chart is the realm of the sensate, and then the middle is the soul or the moment of conversion, and the top of the chart is going to be the notion of the true. The left side of the chart is subjectivity, the right side of the chart is objectivity. But keep in mind that we're aiming toward the internal triad of schema, infusion, and rhema. Schema, infusion, and rhema, because he does say that the believer is to form an authentic schema, and that means not overly rationalized, but an authentic schema that is infused by the numinous to become living Rhema voice. Living Rhema voice. We're going to begin with block 1 on the bottom left corner, our phenomenological starting point. Professor Otto tells us that God's attributes are grasped by the intellect, but deity is a supra-rational subject. It is beyond reason. We seek the non-rational aspects of deity, and those are abbreviated under the category of the holy, the numinous. They're abbreviated under the category of the holy. There will be negation because we know that he opposes rationalization over rationalization. So block 2, the necessary moment of negation, we negate the rational moral schemas of deity that have been reduced to rationalistic moral schemas, because the holy is ineffable. It's beyond concept. The holy is beyond rational concept. The holy contains a surplus of meaning. Therefore, the category will be renamed, he says, as the noumen, and the state of mind that corresponds to the objective noumen is the numinous state of mind. But of course, it does not omit concept, but it means that concept has to become something more than moral precepts. It has to be more of a signification than rational precepts. It has to be a sign that points beyond itself. So concept, of course, is employed. And our first attempt at concept is in block 3. So in block 3, we're going to look at Newman as energy. He begins by taking up the first conceptual attempt as the concept of energy. We begin in numinous humility. We become aware that the transcendent is the real. The noumen contains the plenitude of being. And we first initially posit the notion of noumen as energy. It's an energy that we kind of sense as an otherness that is the orge, or the wrath of God. We have kind of a subjective feeling of fear in the presence of this awesome power, this awesome energy. But that's just a beginning, and that's going to get transformed into the positives. We kind of begin with that negative concept of energy and fear, but it is going to change. We need to move up into that moment of conversion, into block 4, because things do change. We do have a transition. And Professor Otto tells us that in block 4, conversion begins with an encounter with the theteron, that which is beyond the usual. We are filled with blank wonder, with interest, and with curiosity. The mind seeks the epikaina beyond. But here's the key point. In conversion, the initial fear now turns toward the noumen in fascination. It's a turn toward God in fascination. We now feel confronted by grace, by love, and by mercy. And conversion simply means positive self-surrender to the noumen. Positive self-surrender. That is conversion. And it creates numinous consciousness. And that's why we're going to move over to the left and look at that circle, which kind of is interrelated with block 4. The numinous consciousness. Now, under the numinous consciousness, it is the mental state of asuchadzo, resigning into the calm of the noumen. It is resigning into the beatific real, to be filled with the overabounding noumen. And we internalize the overabounding noumen as daunting mysterion, that fearful side, but also as alluring fascination. So it includes the fearful side as the daunting, but it also includes the positive side of fascination, the alluring fascination. So numinous consciousness internalizes both aspects. And you'll notice that signals do go out from our numinous soul, our numinous consciousness. And they get sent to the intellect. They get sent to that moment of infusion, when the schema is infused, and they get sent to the realm of positing, which is the realm of the living Rhema. But we're going to move on to block 5 now and take a look at the intellect first. Now we're going to take a look at the intellect. When we look at the intellect, we're looking at the elective cause of our volition. Ideas become interactive. numinous consciousness must be shaped into an authentic schema, not rational dogma, but an authentic schema that will be infused with the numinous. It is informed by the infusion of signals from the numinous consciousness. It is he calls this the feeling intellect as conscience. It is the feeling intellect as conscience. He always emphasizes experience and feeling. It is the feeling intellect as conscience. And that means that the schema, the relational, interrelated picture of ideas, is going to pass through infusion to become authentic. So if you look at block 6, we look at the active cause of volition as the moment of infusion. The rational schema becomes infused from above with the numen as spirit. Obligation is first recognized, and our need to express the numinous consciousness in positing. We perceive the holy as value, and moral obligation emerges, because deity makes a claim to service upon us. We are confronted by an obligatory claim upon our lives by the Spirit. But we have infused the rational, interrelated picture of ideas with the realm of the feelings of numinous consciousness. We empower the schema with emotive numinous consciousness. Then we can enter into positing as Rhema, living voice. Not the proclamation of a list of precepts, but positing as living Rhema voice in block 7. And Professor Otto tells us that the numen becomes our object of craving. Subjective latency comes forward as exclusive interest, and that means the infused schema comes forward. And he tells us that religious feeling and longing for atonement emerges. We seek to awaken others to the numinous by presenting a representative description of gospel experience. So the gospel is not a list of rational precepts. The gospel is not a list of dogma. We posit the gospel as representative living description, in other words, personal testimony. It has emotive force. It is a presentation of representative description. It is descriptive to become living Rhema voice rather than rationalistic dogma. And so that's the 3 moments of the act of volition. It's schema, passing through the moment of infusion by the numinous consciousness to become a living Rhema voice of the gospel. To become a living Rhema voice of the gospel. Remember, the Gospel of John begins by calling Christ the Logos, but then later has Simon Peter confessing that Christ is the Rhema, the Rhemata Zoe. You contain the words of life, the living words of life. Simon Peter confesses to Christ, you are the Rhemata Zoe. You have the Rhemata Zoe. So we are now ready to enter into the realm of Praxis. And if you look at block 8 in the top right, it is Praxis as living Rhema. And Professor Otto tells us that our positing must be heard through the Spirit. It must be that being born from above. It must be heard through the Spirit. Praxis includes living fellowship and personal contact. We present the word as living Rhema. And that way the hearer is moved to apprehension. They're not ascending to accepting rational precepts. They are moved emotively to apprehension, because rational terms are empowered by numinous consciousness. And interestingly, Professor Otto tells us that Praxis is posited as art more than anything else. Authentically, it is posited as art rather than reason. It is posited as art. But like all phenomenologies, there is a return moment, and that is block 9 in the bottom right, and it's called esuchazo. It's the moment of being silent before the holy other. That creates return moment. Return moment is esuchazo, remaining silent because we lack the appropriate words to do justice to the holy. The here and now of things is negated so that the holy other can become actual and can come forward. We then internalize this experience and return back into the self, back into the numinous consciousness. So return moment is this moment of being surrounded by, indwelt by, an esuchazo silence before the holy other of the numinous, of the numen. Then we return back into the internal numinous consciousness in return moment. And that, of course, will be a maturity of the numinous consciousness because we are now entering out of praxis, and it will lead to a better and more mature next round of positing. Because we go through this system all over again, we begin with a supra-rational beginning. We pass through the negation of rationalization again. We look at the numen as energy again. The second time through, conversion is ongoing because it includes not just justification but sanctification. So conversion again is taken up as the movement towards sanctification. And then we, of course, are always dialectically related to the numinous consciousness in this work. We enter again into Schema, Infusion, and Rhema. Schema, Infusion, and Rhema. And we pass through that a second time, and then the next Praxis as living Rhema becomes even more persuasive, more alluring, more empowered toward bringing others to numinous consciousness. And then that second time through will bring us to another return moment. And that return moment will again re-internalize that which is learned, that which is acquired, and numinous consciousness will be raised again, higher and higher and higher, to greater and greater maturity, to greater imprinting by Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of Truth. So we have what I consider to be one of the greatest phenomenologies I've ever studied. I think that Professor Otto gives us a phenomenology that is truly addresses the experience of Christianity, and because of that, it's an extremely powerful phenomenology. We will have this for the remaining 100 pages that we will cover, and that's going to wrap up our composite, pages 1 to 75, as a composite summary.